All right, welcome back to the channel, everybody. So I usually don't do these type of videos where it's just, me talking. But due to this one particular manufacturer's, ups, I think it's necessary that anyone that has the means to get this out there does so more people are made aware of the issues and can hopefully avoid disaster, especially in this case. So that's what this video is going to be about. As you can see, I am not in the studio. I'm actually in a hotel in the United Arab Emirates on a business trip. So if it sounds a little echoey and the lighting is off, well, I'm doing my best with what I got here. So the company we're talking about is ASUS, and they're taking a lot of heat lately because of some of the videos that have been released by, specifically Steve from Gamers Nexus. And I'm not just trying to hop on the bad press bandwagon here. I am an owner of an X670 Crosshair Hero board from ASUS. And I've also got the 7800 X3D in it. And that is the exact combination that Steve was using where it burnt up. And we'll get into the details of why that happened, what ASUS did wrong, and how they need to fix it. Now that it's out there, it's been identified, what can they do as a company to recover? So for starters, the board that I got was from, I think it was Amazon or Newegg. It's right when it came out, so it has the original BIOS on it. Now, I did do a BIOS update right away when I got it, but that was a long time ago, and I have not updated the BIOS for the new chips, the new X3D chips. I wasn't really planning on getting one of those, but I decided, because I use Microsoft Flight Simulator a lot, that is going to be the best CPU for that exact scenario. Now, if we got a 13th gen, 13700, 13900, something like that, those are great chips. They're great gaming chips. But when you are, especially in VR, in Microsoft Flight Simulator, you need the absolute best CPU out there in order to achieve the maximum frame rate. And as of right now, that 7800 X3D is the absolute best. It blew my mind when I fired up the sim for the first time. I actually saw, so you put on, we're getting a little off topic here, but you put the developer options on and you can look at the FPS, but it breaks it down by what's limiting your FPS at the time. So for the longest time, it's been limited by main thread, which is your CPU. And for the first time ever, this is with a 4090 in it as well, I was limited by the GPU. Never happened before. So that just shows the power of those AMD chips. So here's my take on the issue. Now, this is going to be a talking head video, so there is no real need to watch the entire thing. Just listen to the audio. Go ahead and minimize me or put me down in the corner of your screen. Either way, let's get to the main problem here. So the main issue is the 7800 X3D, the X3D lineup in general is, it's fragile. Now, let's get one thing straight right away. This problem is not AMD's fault. This is very clearly an ASUS issue, specifically ASUS, not the other motherboard manufacturers. It's not the motherboards in general. It is only ASUS. So the 7800 X3D is based off of the 7800X. Well, that's pretty obvious. But what they had to do to make that 3D V-cache work is they had to downclock it a little bit. They had to take some speed off of it. So it does not achieve the same frequency as the 7800X. So with that great gaming power that they have in this chip comes, less power and less speed. And that's fine. I mean, slower speeds are fine as long as the performance is there. And those X3D chips definitely have the performance. So that's one side of the problem. Now you have the other half of the problem, which is DDR5 and Expo. Intel has XMP. Those are the profiles for taking your memory up to its advertised speeds, or hopefully close to those speeds. And AMD has Expo. They both pretty much do the same thing. Now the latest generation of CPUs from both sides come with limitations on the speed that they can achieve out of the box for DDR5. So with Intel, it is 5,600 megatransfers per second, and then AMD has a limit of 5,200 megatransfers per second, which, now if you've been on the market for DDR5 kits, you definitely know that's not the maximum speed that those kits can achieve. So like if you put DDR5 into an Intel system, and I've shown this in a video before, it defaults to, I believe, 4,800 megatransfers per second. So what you have to do is you have to go in and use XMP for Intel or Expo for AMD to be able to basically overclock your system to be able to handle that speed. So you're overclocking the voltages to the RAM itself so that it can achieve those speeds, and you're overclocking or applying a little more voltage to the chip. So the VSoC and the VDIMM. So you want to raise your frequency of your memory, you apply a higher voltage. The memory controller on the CPU also needs higher voltage to run those higher speeds. So there you have two voltages that have both been raised up. Now, normally that isn't an issue, but like I mentioned before, that voltage to the CPU, that's an issue because of that X3D chip and the fact that it can't be overclocked. Those chips are already running at their absolute maximum capability. So that brings us to the main problem, the VSoC. Now that voltage is hard set by AMD at 1.3 volts. And while other boards are maintaining that, even with their Expo profiles, they do not go above 1.3 volts. It turns out that the ASUS motherboards do. They breach that 1.3 volts and go quite a bit higher. And that leads to, well, the worst possible scenario, which is burnt chips. So this is completely up to ASUS to handle this problem. It's been identified, the voltage is too high, it's causing an issue. Now it's their turn to go out there and fix it. So how do you fix an issue like that? Well, you release a BIOS update. Now it's really common to see BIOS updates, frequent BIOS updates, when you have new CPU releases. Not everything can be planned for. So when you put them out there, you see an issue, you correct it with a BIOS update. That's why it's so important to always look at BIOS updates for your system at home. A lot of you watching probably haven't done that, maybe ever. So go ahead and check your BIOS and see if you're on the latest version, because you might gain some performance. You might fix an issue like this that could be catastrophic. Okay, so ASUS needs to release a BIOS. Well, they did. And that's the problem. That's where ASUS as a company has failed. Yes, they did come up with a new BIOS. And it says right in the BIOS description that this is going to fix the issue with overvolting, with causing damage to the CPU. Now that's great. And if you if you're worried about this problem and you were following it, now you see the BIOS update, go ahead and update it, right? Well, they released this critical update as a beta. And typically betas are, for the dangerous folk that like to just test things out. When something comes out, they want to test it right away. And they're okay accepting the liability that something might break because of that. And it is just a beta release. It's kind of use at your own risk situation. So the fact that ASUS released this as a beta BIOS update says that they're not sure if this is truly going to fix the issue or be robust enough to turn into an official update. They're still testing it themselves, basically, or waiting for the consumer to test it and report back problems. So on that update, they actually put a disclaimer that said, using this beta version will void your warranty. Basically, well, not void your warranty, but any warranty concerns regarding issues with this BIOS loaded. So you load the BIOS, go ahead and do anything else after that point, because obviously you're thinking, now I've fixed the issue, I can go ahead and tweak the voltages, I can do whatever I want because it's safe. ASUS has fixed the problem, so I'm free to do what I would have done before. Well, that's the problem, and what they've done with that disclaimer is say that any problem that comes up after you install that BIOS is not in warranty. The warranty will not cover it. And I feel like that's a way for ASUS to just kind of get out of anything that happens. So as Steve from Gamers Nexus pointed out, even the BIOS that they released still didn't fix the problem. Yes, it lowered the voltages to the CPU when using those Expo settings or those Expo profiles, but it still didn't bring it down below 1.3 volts like other motherboards have done. It would show that it's 1.3, but then end up being slightly over when it was measured. So if you load that BIOS on there and anything happens to your board, well, it's because you put that beta version on there and you accepted the risk. I feel like that is just an easy way to cover all warranty claims and say, well, you put that on there, you read the disclaimer, right? Sorry, it's not our fault. And that is just an extremely shady thing to do for a company. So now that we know what the issue is and how ASUS responded to it, we come to the point where I go, I can't reasonably get ASUS products anymore because I don't know how they're going to treat updates or warranties or anything in the future. They've done this now. It's out there and they're not fixing it. As far as I can tell, it might, they might have come out with a statement, but I haven't seen anything. It's not been all over the place for everyone to read. So if they have released a statement, awesome. Put it in the comments. That way we can see it. But as far as I know, that's it. They put the BIOS out there. I actually looked at the BIOS update and I think the disclaimer is gone already, but it was up there for a while, which means they intended to enforce it. And that kind of sheds some light on how the company is operating and how they want to treat issues like this, issues that are specifically ASUS's fault. So up to this point, I've always had a great time with ASUS. I'm reviewing one of their laptops right now, the Zephyrus M16, the one with a 4090 in it. So if you want to see that review, it's coming up. I'm not going to say anything bad about ASUS in that video because I did most of the review prior to learning about this whole motherboard issue, and that doesn't really apply to the laptop that I have. So that shouldn't take away from that division, the laptop division of ASUS. But as far as the motherboards go, I have a lot of ASUS motherboards. It's been a long time of using ASUS motherboards, and I've found them extremely easy to use as far as navigating the BIOS. The way that they have their BIOS arranged is very intuitive and easy to understand. And like the memory overclocking that I did, where you had to go into the BIOS and change the voltages and everything to get 64 gigabytes of DDR5 to work on these new platforms. For that one, it was 12th gen Intel. I use ASUS for the motherboard because it's just so much easier to navigate. I've tried MSI, I have tried Gigabyte, haven't tried ASRock, but the other major motherboards or the other major brands, I have tried those and I get lost in their BIOSes. I haven't spent enough time because I have found ASUS to be so reliable. So I've definitely kind of swayed towards ASUS when I'm picking out motherboards for each generation of CPU that comes out. And when I build, custom systems, or if I want to show tutorials on something in BIOSes, because of how good the BIOS is. And I think the majority of people will agree that ASUS has built some pretty awesome motherboards, and their warranty services have been, pretty great. I've used the RMA process before, and no question, they took a motherboard back that had an issue, sent another one out. It was painless and great. But seeing things like this leads me to believe that there is going to be some problems with issues that come up with these new CPUs. You have that specific combination and then immediately they question like what BIOS are you on or what exactly happened, trying to make it so that it's not their fault and that they don't have to honor a warranty. So what does ASUS need to do now to correct the situation? Well, they need to talk about it. They already came out with a BIOS that attempted to fix the issue, and it's a step forward in correcting that, but they need to take it one step further, do all the testing, maybe talk about, hey, we've got this problem, it's identified, we're working on a BIOS update. Let the consumers know that don't use Expo until the official release comes out. And when that does come out, don't include some kind of disclaimer like that, especially on those beta versions that come out. If you release a BIOS version, beta or not, you're releasing it to the public. And a lot of people won't even know what a beta is. They're just gonna say, hey, I need a new update for my BIOS, that's the latest one, download it and install it. You're telling me that those people that didn't fully see that that was a beta or understand what that means and the things that can come with a beta, the problems that can arise from that they're gonna have voided warranties because of it? That shouldn't happen. If you release a BIOS, that's it. You've released it to the public. Whatever happens because of that, you should fix. And with this issue that came up, talking about it is the best way to ensure customers that you are working the problem and finding a solution for it. That is the best thing to do, is to just put it out there in public. I will say that this has planted a seed of doubt in my mind now. So in future builds and collaborations and projects that I have, I will be thinking about trying other motherboards now because of this. Maybe I won't go with ASUS when, you know, the 14th gen CPUs come out, or Ryzen 8000 or whatever it is. Maybe I'll be looking at Gigabyte or MSI. And I think you all should do the same thing. You should start weighing your options. You should take things like this that have happened and go, this may impact me in the future. Maybe I should choose a different brand. Now, ASUS does make pretty high quality motherboards. That's a fact. But the way they handled this situation should be considered when you're shopping for your next motherboard. Well, that's gonna do it for this video. I hope it's just some information to bring you up to speed if you haven't watched some of the other main channels there and their opinions on it. Thank you for coming to this channel to get my point of view. I hope it was informative. Now you know what's happened. You can make the right decision moving forward. I appreciate you watching the channel. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.